So good morning, guys. So today we're going to continue on our lectures on environmental flows. Environmental flows. Do you remember we spoke about environmental flows? Environmental flows is what in the National Water Act is referred to as a part of the reserve. The ecological water requirements, in-stream flow requirements, they're all different terms that we use to describe environmental flows. You remember? We had an introduction, we spoke about principles of environmental flows. All right, and what's very important about environmental flows is that we take this shift from how we utilize water resources to us being a part of the water resource. Remember we spoke about this. So we have to consider the whole system when we look at environmental flows. And we are a part of that system. So the ecosystem is a part of that system that requires water. And we need that ecosystem, and then the balance and the linkages between that system is what is important to manage. And one of the important fields of research, the fields of water resource management that is important across the whole world is environmental flows. Do you remember we watched that short video on environmental flows? Hey? Guys, 2 weeks ago. It's too long ago, hey? So this is the definition of environmental flows. Again, in the context of the National Water Act and water resources management in South Africa, environmental flows are a part of the reserve. The reserve. Do you remember that? The reserve. And you remember what the reserve is, hey? The reserve is part of the resource-directed measures procedures of the Department of Water Affairs National Water Act. And you determine the reserve, which gives you the basic human needs and the ecological water requirements or ecological requirements. And then through the classification, you consider the ecological requirements and the user requirements together. And then in the RQs, you determine laws and legislations to achieve it. But, however, a part of that is called environmental flows. And environmental flows is a global field of work, global. So the environmental flow topic, we're not referring to, and I'm not describing the reserve and how you determine the reserve. I'd rather present to you what environmental flows are, how you determine environmental flows, because that is something that's happening on a global scale. First of all, what is environmental flows? What are they? So environmental flows describe the quantity, timing, and quality of freshwater flows and levels necessary to sustain aquatic ecosystems, which in turn support human cultures, economies, livelihoods, and well-being. This is from the Brisbane Declaration of 2018. There is a publication that has formalized this argument, and that was published by Angela Artherington in 2018 as well. So there is another publication by Angela Artherington. If you look on Google Scholar, you will find the Angela Artherington publication, which formalizes the Brisbane Declaration of 2018. So this declaration is quite new, but environmental flows are not new. In fact, the first Brisbane Declaration was published in 2007 or 2008, and 10 years later it was just updated to make sure that we all understand exactly what we're doing. So what are they in essence? It's the amount of water and the quality of that water that you must leave in the system or provide to the system to keep the system itself in a functioning condition. So if you look at a river ecosystem that has natural flows coming down the catchment into the river, the processes in that river and the organisms that live in that river have adapted and established themselves in a river that has a natural variability. So that river has natural wet periods, and that river has natural dry periods, and everything that lives in that river has the ability to survive and often needs that variability between the dry periods and the wet periods, and the amount of water that is the base flows and the high flows. So if you want to come and use that river ecosystem, you want to come and take water away, or you want to change the system in some way, you're going to start affecting the system. Do you agree? Do you understand that? You will start to affect the system if you start to use it, to start to take water from that ecosystem. But those organisms and the processes that the system require some of that water to be sustainable. So environmental flows is a process that you implement to determine how much water and when must that water be provided to ecosystems to keep that system functioning. Okay, that's quite important. So if you do maintain these ecosystems, in turn, so as a result of maintaining those systems, you will then also provide for human livelihoods, cultures, economies, and their well-being as well. Okay, so there's a relationship between a river ecosystem and the benefits, or the state of the system and the benefits that we as people obtain from that ecosystem as well. You remember we always talk about the differences between the state of the ecosystem and the ability of that ecosystem to provide services. This is another example. So when we refer to aquatic ecosystems in the context of the environmental flows, it refers to rivers, streams, springs, floodplains, wetlands, lakes, coastal water bodies, lagoons, estuaries, and groundwater dependent ecosystems. These are all inland water resources, inland aquatic ecosystems. And again, just to emphasize that although we refer to environmental flows here, you have often heard me refer to in-stream flow requirements and ecological water requirements, which is what the National Water Act, the language of the National Water Act. Okay, the National Water Act does refer to these different components. Do you have any questions? Do you understand that? I'm going to ask this. In your exam and your test, you will get questions on this, definitely. Okay, heads up. Today we're going to move on from the principles. Remember last time we spoke about principles? Do you guys remember, hey? It's important, guys, because those principles about equity and sustainability and sharing and evidence-based, those principles are very important in determining environmental flows. And all of those different principles have come together to give us this list of different environmental flow methods. So environmental flow methods are the tools, they are the methodologies that we can implement to establish or achieve the environmental flows. And all of these tools, or part of them, include ecological, social, and economic components, environmental flow methods established for rivers and associated floodplains and ecosystems. So today the emphasis on establishing environmental flows is on managing river ecosystems. Why would you think that we would put so much effort into river ecosystems and not other aquatic ecosystems? And by the way, guys, I uploaded all of these lectures this morning onto the Dropbox link. So if you go onto the Dropbox link, from now you will be able to download these lectures, these presentations. And then the lectures that are being recorded will be on my YouTube channel. I've started uploading it, but we just had a bit of a delay the last week with connectivity. Yes?
It's a request. I checked the what you call the videos on YouTube,
Yeah.
and they're all mixed. So I would like you to separate them, like create a subfolder, Zoo 1, 2, REM.
YouTube doesn't do that.
It does.
Does it? Maybe you can come show me. But what you should also just look at is if you go onto Moodle, you can click on that link straight from Moodle. But that's a good point. I will look into it, okay. But that's a good idea. Just move them. And can you move them around after you've uploaded? Oh, okay. Okay, I'll try that after this. All right, so in terms of the environmental flow methods, we focus on rivers. Why? Because river ecosystems from a catchment perspective is what's transporting all of that water around the catchment. So we know that if we want water here, we can just take some from the river because all of the rainfall that falls upstream of us is going to come past us. If we want to take water from here and send it somewhere else, we can divert it from one river to another river. Okay, we may build a dam, but it's the river ecosystems that are providing us with the water that we use predominantly around the world. So we focus on river ecosystems. And in order to keep river ecosystems functioning, we need to consider all of those ecosystems that are directly associated with or linked to river ecosystems. That would mean estuaries. Rivers all flow down into estuaries and into the sea. Okay? So estuaries are important as well. But floodplains, the river-floodplain relationship. So a river ecosystem often has floodplains on the lateral edges of the river, where if the river comes into flood areas, those floodplains become part of the river. So if you're going to consider rivers, you often have to consider their floodplains as well. Okay, and that's really the emphasis that we have for environmental flow assessments in the world. We do environmental flow assessments for lakes, we do environmental flow assessments for different types of wetland, palustrine, lacustrine ecosystems, and estuaries, groundwater, surface water connectivity, but we really focus on rivers. So for you guys, the focus and the emphasis is going to be on determining environmental flows for rivers. All right, so in terms of the environmental flow assessment methods, a South African, Rebecca Tharm, in 2003 established these 4 categories for environmental flow methods. The first one is a hydrological method, hydraulic rating method, habitat simulation, and holistic methods. And I'm going to unpack each of these methods. What's important to understand is that each of these methods or tools can be applied either in a rapid desktop context. You can just collect the data that's available for you. You can stay in your office and you can do the environmental flow assessment based on the data you have. And or for more comprehensive assessments, you often need to go into the field and collect data. Okay, but if the data is available, you can do it in the field. If you don't have the data available from the field, your confidence of your outcomes is going to be reduced. Okay, consider that as well. Okay, first one, hydrological environmental flow assessment method. So I'm going to go through each of these: hydrological, hydraulic rating, habitat simulation, and holistic methods. And I'm going to leave something for you at the end. So hydrological environmental flow assessment methods. Hydrology, the study of hydrology, is the study of the timing, volume, duration, and variability of flows, only flows, in your system. Okay, so what are we interested in here? We're interested in the hydrological statistics. When do you get high flows? When do you get low flows? When do you get floods? When do you get small floods or big floods? When is there base flows? When is there base high flows? When are there droughts? When are there not droughts? Do you understand? All of those different hydrological focused statistics is what you consider in hydrological methods. Okay, guys, it's important to understand for hydrological methods that we consider just the volume, timing, duration of flows. We do not consider the relationship between the volume, time, and duration of flows and the habitats that they provide. Okay, we only consider the flow itself. So it considers hydrological periods, looks at historical flows, current flows, future flows. When you do a lot of your statistics on how flows have changed, whether you've had a dry period or whether you've had a wet period, or what does it look like if you have floods, that's all hydrology. And hydrological environmental flow assessment methods use those statistics alone. The outcomes are usually percentage or lookup tables and maps, although hydrological based methods may include other variable considerations. Okay. What's important here is just to consider that we're talking about the amount of water that's available in your system and when it is available to your system. And we want to give recommendations on if you've had historically a certain amount of water and during drought periods, you know how much water is available in the system during drought periods. You know that the system can survive those type of drought periods. Maybe not very often, but they can survive those drought periods. So if you need to utilize water resources and you're going to mimic a drought season, the system can survive that. But you must be aware that it may not survive that for very long. So if you're going to take water out of the system that is greater than any drought that that system has ever experienced, you're probably going to cause serious harm to that environment. Do you understand that? If you stay in the river, like this crocodile river here, it doesn't dry up. It goes low, but it doesn't dry up. There's always water in the system for refuge area for the ecosystem. If you change the hydrology of the system and you dry it up, there's no more water in the system. Why? Because you're abstracting all of the water upstream. You will cause a massive impact to this ecosystem. Do you understand that? And from a hydrological perspective, all you're looking at is how much water is available, how much water is being used, how much water does the system need. This is one of the examples of how we represent this information. So this picture on the left here is a map of a water management area or a catchment in KwaZulu-Natal. It's called the Mvoti catchment. And all that this map shows you is in terms of the amount of water that's available in your catchment. You can see as the rainfall falls in the area and starts to flow down towards the estuary, you can see that the amount of water available inside the system increases. So it shows you that all from a hydrological perspective, all of the water falls into this catchment and flows downstream. And if you want to know where you're doing some of the work or where you need some of the water or what part of the system requires water to keep it sustainable, I can look at the amount of water available. So hydrology is a very important part of environmental flow assessments. This picture on the right is a graph of the Senku River in Lesotho. the upper Orange River. In Lesotho, the Orange River is called the Senku. And from a study that we did in the Senku River, we could determine what was the natural hydrological variability in the system. So you can see the left axis shows you how much water there is flowing in that river on average every month in the system. And you can see that during December, January, and February, when we also expect our rains, there's a very high amount of water available in the system. But if you look at July, August, and September, there's a very low amount of water that's naturally available in the system. So if you want to take water from the system, you need to understand what is the natural variability of flows. And for your information, this orange line here at the bottom is one of the environmental flow scenarios that was considered for the Senku River. And what you can see there is that the variability is still available. So even though you're taking a lot of water out of the system, you still have high flows in January, February, March, and you still have low flows in July, August, September, but the flows never go down to zero. Okay, the flows never go down to zero. So we often come up with a range of these different scenarios, and based on the consequences of these different scenarios to the ecosystem or to the people in the environment, we will then go through a trade-off process and decide which one they should use. Okay, but I'm only looking at hydrology. Okay, so for a test and exam perspective, if I ask you about hydrological environmental flow assessments, you only talk about hydrology. Here are some examples. Texas method, base flow methods, there's a whole range of different methods. Okay, the only reason for showing you this is because many people have established different environmental flow assessment methods that are hydrological methods only, you understand? And they are being used throughout the whole world. Many of these authors are actually South African, and these methods come from South Africa. In summary, what's the relevance? Environmental flow methods, hydrological environmental flow assessment methods, can be implemented on multiple scales, spatial scales. What does spatial scale mean? Does anybody know what a spatial scale is? Scale in space. An area scale. So it's to say, in terms of the area that you're working on, a small spatial scale will be a local scale like the university. A regional spatial scale will be the region of Mbombela. And a national scale will be the whole of South Africa. So you can apply these methods on a site, or you can apply these methods on a reach, you can apply these methods on a region, or you can apply these methods on the whole catchment. Okay, multiple spatial scales. And that's something that is available with most of the environmental flow assessment methods. It considers past and present environmental flows and data or hydrology. It considers alteration to the volume, timing, and duration of flows, and is related to flow ecological indicators. Sometimes they say, again, consider that we're not looking at habitats and specifics, but sometimes we know that if you're going to change the flows in a system, like this, we know that the queuing is going, the queue flows, the timing of flows, and the way it's going to be changed is going to affect the ability of some species to migrate. We haven't done the assessment of those species specifically, but we have some information available to say that there's probably going to be a change in a part of the system. If we know that the amount of water is going to go down, we know that the abundance of fish available for people to use is going to deteriorate as well. The actual amount of fish that's available, because the size of the system is going to deteriorate, is going to come down. Okay, so sometimes you do make inferences, but it is not considering habitats. This approach does not allow for the evaluation of relationships between flows, habitats, and ecological components. That's very important. It does not consider the links. So when we think of flows and how the flows are going to change, often we want to say, what does that look like in terms of habitat? And the hydrological environmental flow assessment methods don't do that. They just look at statistics. Okay. The next one is hydraulic rating. Hydraulic rating environmental flow assessment methods. So guys, again, I'm going to be presenting each one of them. Hey? So for this, I'm probably going to ask you to understand the differences between hydrological methods, hydraulic rating methods, habitat simulation methods, and holistic methods. Okay. So the next one, after hydrological methods, is hydraulic rating methods. So what do we do here? Here, we make that link between the flow in the environment and habitat availability. So we're looking at what is the habitat, and you can see the map on the top there. So I'm looking at the river now itself, and the part of the river itself. You can also consider this cross-section to know, in terms of the different flow variability, how much water is available inside the river, and what are the habitat characteristics inside the river that is provided by these different flows. Okay, so we've taken that big step from just looking at the volume of water, the timing of water, the variability of water. Now I'm looking at what is the habitats that are provided by the system, by that amount of flow. It considers changes in hydraulic variables, weighted perimeter or maximum depth, and the different biotopes available. Biotope is a fancy word for habitat availability, different habitat availability. The objectives are to maintain ecological or social objectives from a habitat perspective. See, I'm emphasizing the word habitat perspective, habitat availability. Very simple. This is now comparing. Hydraulic rating environmental flow methods can be implemented on multiple spatial scales. You can apply it on different levels, again, spatial scales, with accuracy of available model and or observed hydrological data, overlaid onto the models. What models are we talking about here? These hydraulic models, which is what Dr. van der Waal spoke to you about a little bit last week. Those models help you to link the flow that's coming down that river to the river itself. And the shape of the river and the slope of the river will give you an idea of how much habitat should be available in that river. Do you understand that? If you guys think of a river as a pipe, okay, and I know what the shape of the pipe is, and I'm putting water down that pipe, I can work out what is the actual habitat like, what is the depth of the water in the pipe, what is the speed of the water flowing through the pipe. If I add rocks and things to the pipe, it's going to cause the water to change directions. And if I can understand how the water is changing directions, I can understand what the habitats look like in my pipe. And then if you take that same pipe and you change its slope, you see that the water will go faster or slower. And that's all that we do. We just try to determine what does it look like, the channel, what is the slope of the channel, what is the friction restricting the movement of water down the channel. And from that information we can determine what do all these habitat characteristics look like. Okay. Okay. What's important here is it considers alteration to the volume, timing, duration of flows again. But the new information is that you're considering these changes in the context of habitat availability. Are you going to get deep habitats anymore? Are you going to get fast habitats anymore? You guys already started to see, some of you, that some species have got different preferences for deep water, some species have different preferences for shallow water, some species have different preferences for fast flow and for slow flow. If you don't provide these type of habitats for these different species, you will lose them. And if you start to lose species, if you have an endemic group of species in the Crocodile River and you drain the river and it becomes dry, you will lose all of those species. Do you understand that? And that's unfortunately what's happening. And from a habitat hydraulic perspective, there's a new issue of certain species require certain types of velocities or depths. And if you change the availability of velocity or depths by reducing the flows too much, you will lose those species. Okay. Consider that. Consider. This allows for the evaluation of the relationship between flows and habitats and infers relationships between ecological components and their habitats. Yes. Now, a very similar type of environmental flow assessment method is called habitat-based environmental flow assessment methods. This type of method, the hydraulic rating method, only takes hydrology and relates that to the hydrological biotopes, the habitat types that are in your channel based on the different flows. What habitat-based environmental flow assessments do is they are based on detailed analyses of the quantity and suitability of in-stream physical habitat characteristics for different types of species. So now I'm going to consider the substrates. I'm going to consider how the substrates can move. I'm going to consider the overhanging vegetation. I'm also going to consider the hydraulic biotopes. Fast, deep, fast, shallow, if there's fast flows or slow flows, if it's deep or shallow, for example. Here you integrate hydrological, hydraulic, and biological response data. So I'm specifically going to look at what are the requirements of some of my species. And I've given you an example here on the top right. That is a map, which is an outcome of an assessment where we took one of those small catfishes. So the groups who were with me yesterday in the Crocodile River, we found one of the small rare catfishes that I told you is quite rare. That is the habitat requirements, preferences for that species in the Olifants River. It occurs in the Olifants River as well. And what you can do is by understanding the species, you can go and determine exactly what its requirements are. So as a part of your practicals, you have to go and look at the species you find, understand the biological and ecological requirements of your different species. Once you have that information, you can go and determine what is the habitat requirements of those species. If you know what the habitat requirements are, you've got some idea of how much water is going to be needed to provide these habitats. And when do I need these habitats? Okay, and the relevance of this, guys, is, for example, historically, you know that we have a species of fish here called the tigerfish. Does anybody know that? There is a fish in the Crocodile River, a little bit below Mombele, that's called the tigerfish. Do you know that the tigerfishes, they all occur in the Congo system? What is it doing here in the crocodile? How did it get here? How did the tigerfish get here down into South Africa if it occurs in the DRC, where there's Ebola, by the way, the Congo? There is evidence from chemistry that there was a link between the Congo and the Zambezi, and the fish could move into the Zambezi, and today we have tigerfish in the Zambezi. Then, between the Limpopo and the Zambezi was a link through Botswana, down the Shashi River. The top of the Shashi River is very close to the Zambezi. And there was a link at some point between the Zambezi and the Shashi River, which allowed tigerfish to then move from the Zambezi into the Limpopo system. And the Limpopo system came right down into Mozambique. And you know what happens in Mozambique when they have big floods? The big floods flood the whole area of Mozambique, and you connect the Limpopo to the Komati to the Maputo rivers. And by connecting those rivers here in Mozambique, we had fish move from the Limpopo system into the crocodile system. Crazy, eh? So these fish have moved from the Congo over time to the Zambezi, from the Zambezi to the Limpopo, from the Limpopo to the Komati into the crocodile to Nelspruit, Mombele. Here they are. These fish now have been here for a long time. If we take these fish and we try to put them back, they are now different. They've started to adapt to the environment, and they live here now. If you dry the river up and you don't provide habitats for them, we will lose them. We will lose them here down into Mozambique, we'll lose them up into the Limpopo, and the Limpopo River itself today is no longer suitable to maintain all those fishes, because the Limpopo River is in a very dry area. When the Zambezi River was flowing down the Shashi River into the Limpopo and down to the Lowveld here, there was lots of water consistently, and that allowed the fish to come down and establish themselves. But when the Victoria Falls was formed and the Zambezi River flowed north, we've lost that connection. Now the Limpopo River is dry most of the year. Do you understand that? And if we don't provide environmental flows for our 40 or 50 different species of fish here, we will lose them. It's as simple as that. And if we start to lose our species, and we start to lose our processes, and we start to lose our services, then the people will also lose the availability to use water. And you know that we cannot, it's very expensive to take salt water and to turn it into fresh water and send it up the river. So this is also directly related to people. All right, flow-related changes are modeled in hydraulic or hydrological programs. We then simulate available habitat conditions linked to indicator species. We look at the different species that are available to us and what they need. The outputs include habitat discharge curves for biota, so it's a relationship between the organism and flows. We call them flow ecosystem relationships. That's what we're interested in. So that we don't just look at the flow and how it's going to change and when we need high flows or low flows, because we don't know what the system needs. So from a habitat-based assessment, environmental flow assessment, we will now be able to look at the specific requirements of indicator species like the Amphileus, the fish we found yesterday, like the chyloglanus, the little suckermouth we found yesterday, like the tigerfish we have here as well. And if we know what they require, we can tell the managers, we need this type of water, and if you give us that type of water, we'll be able to maintain the system. Easy peasy. All right. So these are different types of environmental flow assessments using habitat-based methods. And finally, if you look at habitat-based environmental flow methods, they can be implemented on multiple spatial scales. Again, it's the same hydrological and current data overlaid onto models that provide a direct relationship between hydrology, hydraulic variables, and ecological variables. Now we have a specific requirement of my species. A specific requirement of my species. Alterations to the volume, timing, and duration of flows are related. So in all of them, guys, the volume, timing, and duration of flows is considered in all of these different methods. How much water is available? When is the water available? Different times of the year. You understand that? All of that information is considered. Allows for the evaluation of the relationship between flows and habitats and ecological components that depend on the species. So with this habitat-based environmental flow assessment method, we have the ability to consider the requirements of species. So can you see, as I'm moving from hydrological environmental flow assessments to hydraulic rating environmental flow assessment methods to habitat-based environmental flow assessments, the complexity of the assessments is increasing. Because for a habitat-based assessment, I need to consider hydraulic rating and hydrological. You understand that? So the complexity of the tools is increasing. And that's just why you can see that the type or when they were developed is more recent. The last assessment method is this holistic environmental flow assessment methods. What does holistic mean? If you've got a holistic plan, what does it mean? Any idea? Holistic considers everything. So holistic environmental flow assessments are based on whatever could be driving the system from an environmental flow perspective. Volume, timing, duration. So this is where it's very important to go back to the environmental flow assessment definition. So for holistic assessments, you consider quantity, timing, and quality of water, environmental water quality. You look into water quality, habitat availability, levels, different ecosystems, different ecosystem requirements, social and ecological endpoints. Do you understand that? All of these different components are considered in holistic environmental assessment. And if you look at the complexity, we've gone from hydrological to hydraulic rating to habitat simulation. Now we look at these holistic methods. Okay. Considers drivers, response components, biophysical indicators of flows. It includes all of the existing environmental flow assessment methods. And this is considered to be best practice. Guys, let me say it again. Holistic environmental flow assessments are best practice environmental flow assessments. Let me say it again. Holistic environmental flow assessments are best practice environmental flow assessments. Let me say it once more. Do you understand what I'm saying here? Do you understand what I'm saying here? Examples are building block, bottom up, stressor response, top down, drift, the drift method, and prop flow. Prop flow. Why am I so excited about prop flow? Guess who developed prop flow? We did, here at this university. It is being used for the whole of Africa and in Australia and in Europe today. Environmental flow assessment methods can be implemented on multiple spatial scales again. See, it's all the same thing. Data provides direct relationship between social and ecological consequences of altered flows, volume, timing, duration. Probability modeling procedures can be adaptable and improved with monitoring data after implementation. It considers everything. Okay, that's really important. In order to consider this type of, on the right-hand side, this type of complex system with all of the drivers, ecological part, social part, timing part, volume, duration, disease, quality, habitat association, you need to use holistic assessments. Okay, and there are different examples of those methods. Okay, this is some ideas of the building block method. What we do is we take all the different requirements and start to build blocks to determine in terms of the high flows and low flows and the ecological requirements of different species, what do we need to do? Okay, this was a very old assessment method. This is the example from the Mara Basin. I've just given you some examples. So here you can see you've got a normal year of flows with the orange bars referring to the flows, the reference flows. The actual black line represents just one normal year. And we've added on all of the biological and ecological requirements that would be required by different species to achieve the environmental flows. And if I, as a scientist, can provide this to the managers, they can make sure that these are achieved. Okay. When you look at your outcomes, you're trying to provide how, for different months of the year, how much flow is required, and you have different classes of floods. So I can provide base flows, dry base flows, wet base flows, drought flows, flood flows. I can consider all of those differences. And at the end, I can provide all of this information into what we call a flow duration table. So this flow duration table says for different months of the year, what is the exceedance curve? For 100% of the time, how much water must be there? You may not go less than this value. But in terms of the floods, I want some floods that look like this. Please, in December, January, I want 150 cumex. You understand? So we can just give them tables that explain all of these different components. When is our lecture ending? Huh? Now. All right, I'll finish this up next week or tomorrow, and then we'll move on.